So hello and welcome to our second Yincast. We enjoyed our previous Yincast. If you haven't listened to it, we were discussing people change and the impact that can have. And it just so happens that we have Matt on the podcast today, who has recently joined Alembic.
Hi there.
You can listen to the previous podcast on Apple Podcast, iTunes, YouTube, or through our website, alembicstrategy.com. This episode, we're going to be discussing changing habits and how sometimes a change in the environment or a crisis can force us to change the way we think, behave. It makes us reevaluate how we've been doing things before. Today on the podcast, we have Matt, Roseanna, and I'm Alice. So for me, the environmental crisis has made me think about my diet and habits I want to try and reduce my impact on the planet. And actually I found it quite challenging at times, and I feel like I've still got quite a lot to learn, and I'm certainly not perfect. I've been seeing all these stories on the news, and they've really scared me into wanting to change and make a difference.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we've known about climate change. I mean, it's been in the press and journalism for the whole of my lifetime, and so it's not a new concept. But there has been in the last year. This has been the year of the revolt and the shock, and people actually standing up for this, and the realization that it is happening in our lifetime, and we have a finite amount of time to think about it. And so that is the shock is that if we don't do something right now, then it might be irreversible. And so I do think those shocks do cause us to change our habits, otherwise we don't. That's our reality check. It's how else do we know what our habits even are? And so I think it's the habit change has come from a shock to our system, and a shock that has made us think in a different way.
Yeah, I think this year is kind of the first year there's been a call to action. As you say, it's been covered for a long time, but previously, although it's a very shocking revelation, there's not been a clear path to do something about it, or at least in the last few years, maybe it's the first time we've started to see that. So for the general public, you see all the cover in the media.
Yeah.
And now we actually have a group of people who are starting to make it more accessible to everybody to start making changes in their lives.
Yeah, and I think when you think about personal change, one of the things that we think about, so it's awareness, resistance, acceptance, change, and I was reflecting on where we are in that cycle. So we have been aware, some debate, in the scientists of, the extent of that. To some extent, we've then been a bit resistant to it because, okay, I get that the world is heating up, and that's a result of our, it's a man-made issue. But what's that got to do with me? And so, whilst I can see it as the whole of the planet, I might personally resist that because it's what's it got to do with me, and how's that affecting my life? But then I think we're now in that third stage, which is about accepting it. So accepting that is what is happening, but there's pockets of society that are accepting it, not the whole. And only once we are accepting it are we then able to actually do something about it and change. And whether it's climate change and changing our habits in the sort of how much plastic we use and how many times we use an aeroplane in the year. We can all take that ARAC acronym into other habits that we want to change. And so are we even aware? So I think we are in a position of accepting that this is what's happening from an environmental point of view. And so it's how can we now change, and what change is needed?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a question of accessibility. I think it falls on such a vast number of different areas of where you could potentially change that. For some people it might be quite jarring and overwhelming to start looking at things which have quite a large impact on their life, particularly when people are more prone to seeing in a short-term view. giving up your car to help save the planet in 100 years. I know even myself, who's reasonably aware of the issues, giving up my car seems like quite a big major step. I'm sure that all of you probably tried to do something which is good for the environment from within your routines.
Yeah.
I found that it's a real pain point.
Well, I had a really interesting situation. I was invited to a friend's house for dinner, and she said she's going to do a plastic-free dinner party. So I was really excited about this as a concept. She works in the city. She was coming home on her way home, going to the supermarket, and she couldn't actually buy anything that would make a meal that in her local supermarket that she ordinarily shops in without buying plastic, and so she wasn't actually able to do it. Perhaps it is possible if you go to 3 different supermarkets or 3 different shops, but we just don't have the accessibility, to your point, Matt.
Yeah.
And we were reading Nudge in our book club last year, and it's Nudge is all about, well, what are all the things that and how can we nudge people into making better decisions that makes it easy for them to make better decisions, so whether that's better environmental decisions about their habits. So how can you make it easier for people that make those decisions that they're not even aware that they're making better choices? And I think that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, I think it's also about you can have the intention to do something like your friend did. They had the intention to have this plastic-free dinner party, but until the big corporations allow people to do that, so maybe in a company, it might not necessarily be that the people are against the change, but you need to be able to give people the platform and make that change is like you said, as easy and as seamless as possible, so it doesn't feel like they're making a huge change, and for it to feel really difficult, and like they're coming up against barriers.
Yeah,
for it to feel
and so
easy.
you take that into an organisation, it does, a different initiative, tackle the way that we manage our clients, for example, in a different way. So there will some people are naturally more resistant to change, and so as soon as you put something in that's easy for them to adopt it and doesn't feel so different, so scary, and there's an understanding of why, then it makes that initiative, whatever it is, easier to adopt. And fundamentally then that's just a communication point and a messaging point, but just making it really easy for those that don't feel as passionate about plastic-free dinner parties, but they could just have a plastic-free dinner party without even necessarily realising it.
Yeah.
And so that's the point, just making it easier for people to adopt.
I can definitely appreciate the difficulties that come with change and with reforming your habits. Having just started with you guys at Alembic, I suppose I come from a point where the deciding to change was something that I did myself, so nobody had to win me over to come and implement those changes. But it's been something which is really tiring. It's reforming a lot of habits all at once, learning a lot of new things. And I could see that if this was within an organization and somebody else was trying to persuade me about change, it would be a lot harder for me to adapt.
Yeah, because it's been a conscious decision and that you're deciding to join us, and you then know that there is going to be an element of adaptation that you need to make, because that it's not going to be like what you've experienced previously.
Exactly.
So you've made a choice to change your habits by moving jobs, which is
I'm my own change champion.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess that's the point about people's appetite for change and whether that's conscious or unconscious. And so if it's conscious, allowing people who want to make a change to do that, but is it more unconscious? Do we even know? So question for you then, are you more aware of the habits that you used to have now that you're in a different environment?
Definitely. It's reforming or breaking your habits and reforming new ones. It's a terribly conscious and painful thing to do. It's very energy consuming.
Yeah.
And I suppose you don't realize your habits have been there sometimes until you break them and you have to develop new ones.
Yeah, because you're in the fact that the fact that nobody else is working in that way, for example, it raises your own awareness that
exactly.
That's a thing.
And when you've been doing something one way for a while, a lot of your day is unconscious. And when you have to spend your whole day consciously thinking about things, it's very different.
So in my awareness, resistance, acceptance, change, you're sort of about to go into resistance, which I might find quite hilarious.
Yeah, I'm definitely. There's definitely a point around understanding other people's habits as well. So you're working collaboratively with a team, and part of what you're doing through your day, you have to be working with other people. And if you're coming from an environment where you know people very well, or you're working for yourself, those relationships come quite seamlessly. Whereas if you're working closely with people in a new environment, you also have to learn their habits. So you can't adopt habits purely of your own making. You have to understand what other people need from you and what they're doing with their lives, to be able to adopt habits which are useful for them.
So maybe you're going to shine a light on our habits as well, and maybe there's it works both ways. So that might be the theme for the next Yincast about resistance.
I bet you're right. I bet there'll be things which you and Nick will have to change in your habits to adapt to me being inflicted on you and your team.
So in a weird way, that's also our choice to grow the team and accept people in, is that we also want to then change. And being open-minded to being changed by having another person in a small organisation, another one person come, it's 20% of the workforce now. So you have to be, we're consciously choosing to be open to us changing as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think another point about change in habits is that it's hard for people to get on board with a change if they can't see a benefit. So I think linking back to climate change, there have been shifts maybe in the weather and things like that, but they're incremental. They're not enough to, a lot of people, it's not enough to really affect their lives. So are we gonna have to wait until there's like a massive change that's really affecting people's lives for the worse that people are actually gonna change?
Yeah, I mean, what's the biggest thing that's happened? It's just like the hosepipe ban for a couple of months of the year, and in July.
Yeah, no paddling pools.
Yeah.
You can see why when you're asking some quite big things which are changing people's lives a lot, and they see such small things changing over a long period of time, that they can't quite balance that in their minds. So if I ask you to give up your car because it's a degree hotter in the summer, you might struggle to reconcile that in your head.
Because right now it's
fine.
Yeah,
and losing your car would be a real pain.
I think also in companies, potentially people that are on the front line can't always, if they're not shared in the vision for the company, they can't see the long term or why they're making these changes. From the very little experience that I have had in companies, I've seen that if people are hidden from the change or why they're doing it, they don't know why it's important or how it's part of something else, how it's, like you said, a small change or maybe a bigger change for part of a bigger vision, they will quite often be resistant to it, even if it doesn't seem like it's that much of a big change. So for example, going from fixed desks to hot desking, I've seen people get really upset about that, but it's more because they haven't felt involved in that decision. They feel like it's being inflicted on them. So I think that's also about communication as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think that's also about choice as well? So to what extent do people have a choice?
Yeah.
Or a say or a contribution, the feeling of being heard.
Yeah.
People do, for changes that affect your day-to-day lives, you do need to be sort of brought into it as a project. And you either need to be involved, or there's a concept of having influencers within larger groups. So you need to be involved yourself, or you need to see somebody that you think is influential to you and sign on that change process. Because I think most people, it's sort of been 70% or so, fall under slight or extreme change resistance. So if you've got nothing that's swaying you in the direction of change, people are naturally a little change resistant.
Yeah. Well, even just talking on a Yincast about habits and change, I'm now just thinking of all the habits that I now want to change. So it's already working for me.
I think I've had enough of changing habits for one lifetime.
So we've just spoken about change in habits, and we've sort of touched on nudge, Matt coming to Alembic, changing habits, resistance to change, and people having to feel like there's something in it for them. So that's a wrap on our second Yincast. Hopefully you enjoyed it, found it interesting, and are still listening. We'd love for you to share your thoughts and insights on anything we've discussed in any of our podcasts. And if there's any topics that you're going through at the moment, either personally or in your company, we'd love to hear about that. And if you'd like us to speak about that, then be more than happy. And if you've got any advice or anything else you want to talk about, please just let us know. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye.